Father in heaven, as I share with how you loved me and how you showed your grace upon me, I pray that Jesus will be seen and he alone will be glorified, and that someone here will be inspired and even have a little bit of hope for maybe those that they are praying for as well to come to Jesus. Amen. So, I'm not going to go through the whole, I was born, wherever and all that, right? And go into a big family history, because I kind of want to spend a little time more on how this whole thing came about. But it was the year 2004, and early in 2004, and my life before, and I was about, now you guys will know my age, but I was about 21 years old at that point. And my life at that time, I had, I still didn't grow out of my childhood issues, right? And I didn't grow out of my teenage issues. I still had body image issues, even as a young boy, right? At 21 years old, I wasn't athletic. So, I played a little basketball here and there, but not consistently. So, I was always I didn't like the way my body looked. I had a lot of ingrown hairs on my neck. So I had a lot of issues with how I looked. And I remember back then, some of my friends would call me Freddy Krueger neck. I don't know if you guys know who Freddy Krueger is, for those who know. He's all burnt up and looking horrific on the whole face. But my neck used to look like that, right? And I just, I tried so many, and it wasn't acne, because I didn't have acne on my face, right? I didn't have pimples. And I would try many different things to try to hide, and I didn't have a lot of hair growing like I do now, so I couldn't hide it with a beard. It just was always irritated. Maybe I was shaving wrong. I don't know. My skin was just horrible. And so I used to always feel very insecure going out in public, especially trying to, socialize with females. I never was comfortable being me, because I didn't like who I was, right? I didn't like what I saw on the outside. But really what it was that, as much as I would do things as a kid, and I was getting into different things, I was getting into some acting, I was getting into some music and toying with little things, on the inside, I felt really bad. And here's the thing, when you don't feel good, because there's people who, you would look at them and you're like, you're not that attractive, but because they feel good about who they are and they feel good on the inside, it makes them attractive, even though they're not do you guys understand what I'm saying? When you feel good, it doesn't matter what the outside kind of looks like, because you feel good and it just somehow makes you different, right? It makes you more pleasant to look at, even though you may not be, Hollywood attractive or physically attractive. You understand what I'm saying? So that really was my issue. I didn't feel good on the inside. And on the inside, I had, a lot of anger issues, just things that I, didn't resolve when I was a kid, growing up in a somewhat dysfunctional home. I used to crap I had a lot of late night partying, drinking, crashing my car all the time, all these different things. And then I was, starting to, I was working. I worked a lot. And I started to work my first job when I was 13 or 14 years old. And then by the time I was 15, I was working every day after high school. I worked every day. When I was, I believe, 16, I started to drive. I was living on my own. Because at that time where I was in high school, my family moved to where they are now. I lived with my brother. And I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to start over a new high school. So I stayed on my own. I lived in my friend's basement, his family. And I would work every day to pay whatever I had to pay to and I'm a teenager. I'm 16 years old. And I had that very early on, by myself, living on my own experience. So I worked all the time. I was always working. Sometimes even Friday nights, Saturday nights, people would go out. I would be out. I'd be working. I'd be tired. I had to get up early for work on a Sunday. So I never really liked working. I just had to do it. It was just something I did, but I never really liked it. And so, as I'm looking for different jobs, and so happened to be, I was working in Westchester County. I was working for a tire company, and I was delivering tires. And I'm going through different places of work, different gas stations, different mechanic shops, even car dealerships, dropping tires off for, the places of business. And so one day, I came into this town called Brewster, and you guys know where Brewster is? It's like about an hour maybe or so from here, and 45 minutes. And so I went to a car dealership there, and I saw an acquaintance of mine working in the parts department. And he's like, oh, haven't seen him in a while. Started conversing with him. And so happened to be that he's like, yeah, we're actually looking for another parts driver since I'm a driver. And why don't you apply here? It's, you get a little bit better pay, whatever. And I'm like, oh, all right, sure. So I made the application, and I go into the interview, but the interview was not what I expected. I expected to be a parts driver. But the interview was like, no, we're going to have you in the prep department. The prep department is where you get the cars ready, clean them up for the customers when they buy their new car or used car. And I did that before, and it was on my resume, and that's probably how it came up. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to be a parts driver. And just a little bit of a brief, stint there. Back then I would drive and I had my freedom. So I didn't want to be like in a building and stay there for 8 hours every day. I'd like to be outside and do what I wanted to do. So they're like, well, listen, here's what we'll do. We'll give you the same pay. Stay there for maybe a few weeks, couple months, and if you don't like it, maybe we'll, because they had just filled the parts driver. They said if it doesn't work out there, maybe we'll transition you and you can become a parts driver. And I'm like, okay. And then they told me that, but you might like this position because we're going to promote you very fast. And I'm like, I'm on my first interview. I'm like, you don't even know me. How am I going to get promoted already? They're like, well, there's one other person that's there. He's been there for a while. He's kind of like an old dog. And he's like, and that individual, we're going to most likely let go in the next couple of weeks. So let him train you. Let him show you how the job is. Let him show you what the routines are. Just kind of like learn from him a little bit. And then eventually in the next couple of weeks, we'll let him go. And then you'll be like a supervisor of that department. And then we'll bring in some young, fresh people that you can train and X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, all right, fine, right? So I'm like, I said, but again, if you really wanted to do the parts thing, that will also be open if that becomes available. I just thought to myself, I'm like, how did I go apply for one job and I'm getting offered something completely different? I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to be at a dealership washing cars. So it turns out I come in on my first day, and at that point, I had a mohawk. I was all into like punk rock scene. It was very heavy set, sloppy looking. And again, had a lot of these internal issues, didn't feel good on the inside. So, all that stuff comes out on the outside. And I remember they're like, okay, go ahead and meet go ahead and meet this old dog that they called, right? And introduce yourself and start working. So I met this gentleman, and I remember like every word out of my mouth back in those days was 4-letter words, right? It was just by nature, it's just the way I talked. If I was breathing air, I was also spewing out curse words at the same time. And so, I'm seeing this guy, and the very first thing when I'm introducing myself, I guess I must have said a few, curse words. And this gentleman stopped me in my tracks and looked me in the eye with dead serious, like I just killed his dog, like looked me in the eye like that, dead serious. And was like, hey, we're going to be in a respectful environment here. I don't tolerate that language in the workplace. And I was like, taken aback. I was like, ain't nobody ever say something like that to me in my entire life. It shocked me so much that, I said, well, listen, I don't see any, no cursing signs here. So and he goes, no, you're not, and it was very serious. So it was a very serious interaction the very first time I meet this guy. And I'm like, oh, great. All right. So I didn't know what kind of guy this was. But I remember before I started this job, I was working at the tire place, right? And I remember there was like a Jehovah's Witness that was working there. And that person was very mean, very ugly, just always angry and angry at everything that wasn't, anyway, so it was always just very like, how do I say, like, very annoying at the workplace. And so I kind of thought, I was like, I hope this is not the same thing, right? I'm like, I can't believe I'm back. I just left the job. Now I'm going to come back to a job like that. Anyhow, so as we're getting along, we're working together. We're cleaning the cars. He's showing me how his system is, and I'm like, wow, it's a pretty good system. It actually works really well, and then, gets cars out fast and gets the job done early. Many times we're done, we're done very early before the clock, before you go home. But one of the things that they told me in the interview was that this person, and I'm like, why are you guys going to fire this guy? Right? He's been here for so long. Why are you going to fire him? They're like, oh, he just, I don't know. It's just we're transitioning. We're bringing some new, we're bringing new spirit, or we're bringing some new faces. We're bringing a new model into this dealership. And, he goes home early on a Friday, there's family stuff and things like that. So we just really, but they told me at the time, like, you don't have to work weekends. If you do your job, it's a Monday through Friday job, like 7 to 4 or 8 to 5 or something like that. I'm like, okay. Didn't think anything of it. So now this person is showing me how to, do the job. I'm learning from him. And then I opened up the cabinet one day, and I don't know why I looked at it, but I was looking at the calendar for whatever reason. And on the calendar, it said, it was like a preaching calendar. And it had like preaching schedule on the calendar. And I'm like, no way. That's why I was like, I knew something was up with this guy. And so sure enough, so then at that point, I just outright asked him, I said, hey, are you a Christian? Like, are you, and with a smile on his face, he said, yeah, I am. And I'm very proud of it. And at that point, I was like, wow, okay. So in my mind, as a 21-year-old little punk, I'm like, all right, now I got another guy, because the previous job, and everybody used to mess with this other guy. So I was like, I'm going to mess with this guy. And so I remember I would leave work and I would tell my friends, I was like, oh yeah, there's this like preacher guy that I'm working with, and he's all like, proper and everything. And so they would tell me things to like, oh, we would all share like, oh, joke with him, start saying this, start saying that, and try to get him, try to get him upset, see what he says. So I said, all right. I started going to work. I started to try to make fun of him. Nothing I was throwing at him was really getting the reaction I wanted so that I can entertain my friends at night, right? And so, and this is a short amount of time, okay? Because this is like within like a couple of days. This is not like a long drawn out period. Remember, they're going to fire him in a couple of weeks. So, this is not that long of a time. And as I would come to work to try to like poke at him, it would always backfire on me because it would always turn into something, and it made me feel bad. And then eventually I started to feel bad doing that, and I didn't like laughing with my friends anymore, making fun of this. This guy's actually not a bad guy. And he wasn't like the other guy, throwing stuff down my throat and trying to jam religion. It wasn't like that at all. And so then all of a sudden, he started telling me about Jesus, started telling me about God. He asked me if I ever read the Bible and if I believed, and I said, yeah. And then we started to have conversation like this. And eventually, it came into the point where, again, remember, I didn't like the way I looked. I had Freddy Krueger neck, right? And eventually he would tell me, it started talking about, how eating better, right? Because there was a time where we went on lunch break, and I went and had some shrimp Parmesan sandwich. The other coworker who I worked with at the time came back and like took 2 days off the next day. He was like sick as a dog. Thankfully, I didn't get sick. And so this gentleman began to share with me about, listen, it's whatever you put inside is what's going to come on the outside. And remember, I'm thinking like, man, I have like Freddy Krueger neck. Like, I need to figure out how to look better. And so he was telling me, yeah, if you eat better, if you eat well, he's like, it will help you. It would make, if you take care of what's on the inside, the outside will take care of itself. You'll feel strong. You'll feel young. Your skin will be clear. Your hair will be stronger. Will be better if you just eat better, right? If you take care of yourself. And as it goes on, he began to share these little tidbits with me. So I started to now be so intrigued by this man that I wanted to go to work. I never wanted to go to work, but now it's like, I loved hearing about what this man had to say so much that I would look forward to going to work. So we got into the conversation of the Bible, and I kind of challenged him a little bit. And I said to him, I was like, I don't think the Bible is actually that powerful of a book. I don't know why people, because he asked me if I ever read the Bible. I said, nah. I was like, crazy people read the Bible. And I'm thinking about this other guy. I was like, I'm not going to be some crazy guy. Like, I'm not going to read the Bible. And so he goes, well, it's actually not that much of a crazy book. What do you know about it? And I was like, I don't really know nothing about it. And then he asked me, well, what do you know about, like anything? And I would tell him, the world's going to end with some kind of nuclear bomb thing. And he would like, well, do you know the Bible speaks about the end of the world? I said, no. I said, I didn't know it spoke about the end of the world. And then he shared with me that, the world's going to end when Jesus comes back. And I'm like, what? Never heard of that in my entire life. And so these conversations began to happen. And we're talking about a short period of time. Like, I met this man March 2, and 9 days later, March 11, I'm receiving my very first Bible from this man. So this is very fast. But that's how quick the intrigue happened. And so I started asking him, I said, okay, so I said, you know what? I don't think the Bible's that powerful. I bet you I can read the Bible and it wouldn't do anything for me. I bet you it won't change my life, it won't help me at all. I said, I don't believe that a book can do that for you. So he goes, challenge accepted. And so he brought me my Bible. Now, at that point, I didn't go and read it right away. It was a little bit of a fuzzy period between when I actually started to read it. He started to realize every day he would ask me, have I opened it? Have I opened it? I said, no, it's still in the back of my car. I haven't opened it. Right? I was doing some extracurricular, like a side hustle job at night, that street work, and so I was getting too busy. By the time I got home, I was too tired. I had to get up to go to work, so I didn't have time to read it. So he sat me down during hours of work and had me open up. And the first book I read, it was like Book of Jonah. It was like 4 chapters. Okay, read it, and again, I didn't understand what I was reading. To me, it was just reading words, letters. I didn't understand. It wasn't, I wasn't very, at that point, I didn't know, education. I wasn't an education person. I wasn't articulate, I would never have imagined that I would be doing something like this at that age, right? I was like, in my estimation, like a very dumb kid. My only grades that I got good in school was math, but it was only because it was like not that hard. Everything else I flunked and was really poor at. I was poor at communication. I was poor at writing. I was poor at speaking, putting things together and putting thoughts together. So I'm reading, but I did read Shakespeare a little bit because I would do acting. So I had a King James Bible, so I understood the thous and the these. It wasn't like foreign to me. But at the same time, I still wasn't understanding what I was reading. I'm reading, okay, this guy got ate by a whale. Got spit out, he's running away, he's getting angry, the city got spared. I'm like, what? Okay, what's the big deal? And again, these little nuggets would come to me, and the gentleman would say, oh, well, do you see how easy it is for animals to obey God, but yet human beings who are made in the image of God have such a hard time listening to God? I was like, oh, shoot, that's what you got out of this? And so in my estimation, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I was like, wow, I didn't realize. So he's like, you got to go deeper. You got to look deeper. You got to look behind the words and see what's going on. The whale listening, and you have the human who's made in the image of God not listening, but the whale is not, And I was like, wow, that's pretty powerful. That's actually, yeah, you're right. And so all these things started to happen. And again, his biggest thing that if you want the outside to be beautiful, because he would tell me, he would have these little sayings, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you put garbage in, garbage is going to come out. But if you put treasures in, then beauty is going to come out, right? And again, if you change the way you are on the inside, the outside will be beautiful. And again, my motivation was, I didn't like the way my life was on the inside. And it was all telling on the outside. Smoking cigarettes, drinking, right? All these things. So, and by the way, I don't know if you haven't figured it out yet, but that gentleman was Elder Pierre, by the way. That was the person who I met at that car dealership and started to break these things down for me. And I tell you, things started to happen. Things started to change really quickly. I met him March 2. 9 days later, March 11, I get my very first Bible. I'm getting lessons. He's giving me tapes. I'm just starting to eat it up, and very quickly, things started to change on the outside. Without me intentionally trying to just, because sometimes I think what happens is we change on the outside, but the inside is not changed, and it still doesn't come out authentic. People think like there's something off with this person. This person's not that, there's something off-putting. But when you change truly on the inside, you don't even realize the outside. The outside's not something you focus on. You're focusing on how you feel, the things that are happening on the inside. So my mind was changing, and what happened was I started to come to work looking different. And that's when the big bosses started to realize and started to see what was happening. And I think they picked up that I was being influenced by Elder Pierre. And so remember, they were supposed to fire him a few weeks into me being hired. Turned out that they put a little test, I think, on me. And they asked me, because they knew that he, goes home early on a Friday, because sunset, and doesn't work on Saturdays. So I think they thought that maybe I was also adopting that. So they challenged me. They brought me to the office. They're like, hey, we need you to come in on a Saturday. I'm like, hold on a minute, time out. Y'all told me that when I first got hired, I wouldn't need to work on the weekend. Why all of a sudden you want me to work on the weekend? Oh, well, we're getting really busy, and we need the extra hand. Can you come in? I said, no, I cannot. Because at that point, I had accepted the Sabbath. There's a whole bunch that had happened in this time period. Even though I wasn't actually going to church yet, but I had accepted things already, and I was on my way, and boy, did they blow their lid. I remember the guy, he was very cocky and arrogant. He was like, well, when I was a kid, I went to church and went to work on a Sunday the same day. Like as if I'm like, how much better he was for doing that. So they were tight. They were upset. A couple weeks later, I got fired. Before Elder Pierre got fired, they fired me. And I was like, what the hell, and their reasoning was really no reason. They just probably didn't want, they wanted to get rid of me because now it was like a mini hymn, and they just, they could not take that. But I remember when it really got serious for me was I was at the time I had a rental car, and even though things were changing, I was loving going to work to speak with Ron and to learn from him and to be with him and just enjoy his presence. He was actually bringing me food. He would tell his wife, because once he talked to me about changing what you eat and how it would help make you feel better. So I was open to that, and he had me try some of his vegetarian food, and it was very tasty. Thanks to his lovely wife for making it. And he would come home and he told his wife to bring a second plate. Make 2 lunches. Don't just make 1. And every day he would bring a lunch for me, and I would eat that. And it would just, and I started to, things were changing. I was like, wow, this is really good. This is like, I never knew the Bible would make someone like this, so pleasant to be with and so helpful. And again, never preaching, never shoving things down my throat, always waiting for me to ask before he would interject or anything like that. So eventually what happened was, even though these things were changing and I was starting to change how my outlook was, I was still hanging out with my friends. It just wasn't the same. I started to put like church music on in the car instead of like our typical music. And they were just like, what are you doing? They thought I was joking. And then they realized I was like, no, guys, I'm really like, I enjoy this now. And they were like, yo, this guy's brainwashing you or whatever, right? But what happened was, I used to have a lot of car accidents. That's probably why I had the rental. I can't remember why I had the rental, but I had this rental car, and I was out late partying, and it was towards the end of March, right? So I met Ron in the beginning of March. This is now towards the end of March. And it was a Friday night into a Saturday. So it was Saturday morning now, and I'm driving from, upstate, driving to the Bronx where I lived. And I fell asleep, slipped on some black ice, spun the car around on the 684, right before the Katona, right before the sawmill, spun the car around, 180. So by the time I crashed and woke up, I'm facing the against traffic, and not a scratch on me. I don't even know if I had my seatbelt on, to be honest with you. I don't remember. I don't think I did. Not a scratch on me, didn't bump myself, nothing like that. The car was wrecked. It was a rental car, so rental company had to deal with that. But car was totaled, car was wrecked, had to get picked up by my brother, car had to get towed to a junkyard, all that stuff. And I just remember at that point, something inside me was just like, yeah, I got you. Like God is protecting me, and it was almost like it was the feeling that I got. It was like an awakening. Like, what am I doing? Like, I'm learning so much about His love. I'm excited about it. It was like I needed to make this. I needed to stop being half and half and make a total surrender and make a total decision. And I remember getting out of that car and looking at it, how wrecked it was. I might have even showed him a picture of it. I can't remember. But I remember, like, at that point, I was like, you know what? I was like, I think I need to go to a church. I'm going to go to a church. And I told him, I said, hey, and he never told me to go to church. But he would always tell me how fun he had, how blessed he was for going to church. And it's just like something about the way he was on the inside. I was like, man, I needed that. I was like, I don't have that in my life. And I needed something. Something was missing. And so I said, hey, I think I want to go to a church. And I wanted to go to his church. So come all the way. He was like, you know what? It's like, that's not practical. You live in the Bronx. You don't got a car right now. He's like, let me find you a church. And he found me a church called Smyrna in the Bronx. And so went to that church. And I remember, I think, like, when I first got into the church, it was either an elder or maybe been to the pastor. I can't remember. But I remember the look that I got. Because when I went there, I didn't look like this. Okay, I had like street clothes. I had a mohawk still. So I kind of looked a little bit like a monster coming in. And I went in there, and I remember the look that I got, and I'm like, oh shoot! I'm like, you're looking at me. But then all the young people are like, oh, your hair is cool. But I remember feeling so uncomfortable sitting there with that mohawk that I called him right after, told him how it was, and was like, why didn't you tell me to cut my hair? And he's like, well, I would never force you to do something, I would never impose myself. And I told him to bring clippers on Monday to cut my hair. The next day we came to work. And he did. He gave me a nice haircut, and then, I looked a little bit different. And then that's when things started to change. I lost that job there, but I remember, like, it didn't matter. I did want to stay learning, but at that point, again, I was reading the Word, I was listening to sermons and hearing, evangelistic meetings, watching a lot of stuff, and asking Him for more. Give me more, give me more, give me more. Like, I'm absorbed with this. Something inside of me excited me about studying the Bible. And I remember the first time, at this point, it's probably maybe a month or so later, and I remember, like, I would read the Sabbath school lesson and trying to, like, understand the Bible, and it was very hard in the beginning. Because again, at that point, I didn't view myself as someone who could understand things on his own without extra help. And one of the things that really changed for me was we were studying the Sabbath school lesson at that point. I think it was second quarter 2004. It was on the book of Isaiah. And I remember, like, the Sabbath school would have the question, and then it would give you, like, a text, and then, the paragraph after would kind of give you the answer. But I wouldn't read ahead. I wanted to go to the text. I wanted to see if I can get the answer from the Bible itself. And so I remember after some time of just trying to understand, I would carry the Bible everywhere I went. Any chance I got, standing in line anywhere, waiting for a bus, waiting for a train, anywhere, any chance I got, I would have my Bible open, trying to memorize, trying to just read. I'm trying to figure out, because I wanted to know the truth for myself. Right? I wanted to know it. I was so happy to have it and to be involved with that. And I was so impressed with preachers and speakers and teachers. I was like, how do I articulate like that? How do I speak like that? Actually, it's a funny story. Before, while I was at the job, I remember I should have started this way. When I was 10 years old, it was like 9 or 10 years old, I had a very vivid dream. And I remember this dream. I don't remember many dreams when I was 10, but this one I remember. And I had the dream twice, about a year apart, right? So I had it in a span of 2 years. I had the dream twice, and I was in the same place on vacation, so during the summertime. And the dream was that I was running in a field of tall grass, and I'm running through it, like a cornfield, I guess. And then I went out of the cornfield, and I was just plain green grass, blue sky, not a cloud in the sky, beautiful day, sun out, and I'm just like I'm enjoying the sun. I'm happy. I'm a little boy, and really happy, really excited. And then all of a sudden, I hear thunder behind me, and now the clouds in the sky got really dark. And then as I'm looking, the clouds started to form in what I thought was the shape of the Ten Commandments, right? Because I said, in Catholic school, you would see the stone shape. And the clouds were coming towards me, and they were in the shape of the Ten Commandments. And then as the Ten Commandments, as it started to have a break in the middle of it, like, they were splitting up. And as it was splitting up, a very sharp, bright light would shine through the middle of the Ten Commandments and blind me that I could not see it. And as I squinted, and again, this is in my dream, as I squinted, I would see a silhouette, a shadow of a man like this with his hands out coming through that light. I thought it was Moses, because, you see pictures of Ten Commandments, you see Moses, right? And then I realized that it wasn't thunder, it was the person that was coming through that light with his hands out. It was his voice that sounded like thunder, and I had no idea, and I realized it was saying something to me, and then I woke up. And I had the dream twice. So in the course of interacting with Elder Pierre, he shared with me his story of him and a couple others founding the Naugatuck Company, the Naugatuck Church. And in that story, it was about a dream. And then I had long forgotten about this dream. Once I read that story and about a dream, it clicked. I said, wait a minute. I was like, hey, and he was talking about how the dream was led by God and to form this company. So I shared with him this dream, and then he shared with me what he thought the dream meant, and he said, yeah, you were called at that young age to preach the gospel. I said, yeah, right, to preach? I was like, there is no way on God's green earth I would ever be talking to anybody and look like a crazy person. Like, there's no way, I don't even know anything about this, right? So he said, listen, he showed me a cup. He started putting water in this cup. If I keep filling this cup with water, guess what's going to happen? It's going to overflow. He said, you keep putting things on the inside, it's going to not help but overflow, right? It's not going to be something you have to try to do, and, it'll just happen naturally. A couple of days later, I'm driving a customer home on the shuttle, and all of a sudden, the guy's complaining about something with a traffic light, and I began to start to witness to this guy out of nowhere. And I remember the feeling I got, and I said, there's got to be a God. There's no way that I would have been able to say things the way I said to this gentleman. Like, I pointed him to, like, the Bible, and the Bible's like the traffic light in our life. Like, it directs us, it guides us, it organizes us, and it takes us to where we got to go. Anyway, and I shared with Ron, I said, do you believe what just happened? I was like, are you a prophet? So all these things started to happen. And then now I find myself into a church, and I'm like, learning, I'm studying, but again, I still didn't understand, I understand spiritual things, I understand little things here and there, but I didn't understand it for myself, to get it for me, to feed myself from the Word of God. And then one time, I'm reading the Sabbath school lesson, I'm opening up the book of Isaiah, I understood it, I put the answer down, and then the paragraph after was the same thing that I had also came to discover. And I tell you, I don't think I felt that kind of joy, that kind of satisfaction ever in my entire life than being able to see from God's Word and understand what it was saying, and not it just being some made up, like, oh, I think this way. No, like, understanding it. And until you get to that, for me, until I got to that point, life was okay, but once I started to see and hear God's Word and God's voice to me, that made a huge difference. And I was just so excited about what I discovered. And I remember I went back to college on his advice. I went back to college. I went to Andrews University, and I did college before, and I thought I was done. Like I said, I wasn't really that smart, right? And I went to college, and I remember going there, and for the very first time, because again, I would always prioritize studying the Bible in the morning, keeping the Bible close. And I remember when I was in college, I started to understand things. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was intelligent. And not in like a cocky way, like I'm smart and nobody, like I felt like I could understand things on a higher level. All because of the Word of God. And it changed me so much on the inside. My skin was better, by the way. I looked better. I had more confidence. I was, getting in shape, I guess. I was losing weight. So things were happening, and for the first time, I started to really feel what life was going to be like with Jesus. And I remember, I started editing for the school paper. I was a writer for the school paper. I never wrote. I never thought I can write or understand English, understand different things. And then I would be asked to speak and preach. And of course, I was in the theology department, only because I didn't want to be, it's not like I wanted to be a pastor. I didn't know. I just wanted to study the Word of God. I just wanted to study the Bible. So I was like, I'm going to go to school to study the Bible. So what do? You go to theology. That was the only reason why. I didn't want to be in, I didn't have plans to do any of that. It's just the path that the Lord had put me into. And all of a sudden, I was speaking here. I was traveling everywhere. I worked with a ministry out in Southern California where we would, go overseas and put Bible schools, and I was teaching the Word of God, and really, it was an amazing thing. But then I had some bumps and detours in life, and even in my spiritual life, where I fell away for a while. But even then, as I fell away and was outside once again, I remember that I never felt cast out. Right? I never felt cast out. I always still had these inner and deep heart conversations with the Lord, even though I was no longer, so to speak, practicing, right? And then what changed? Well, this is 10 years of being, 10 years of this detour, so to speak. And I have two lovely children in the midst of all of that, Jacob and Julia, 12 and 7 now. And I remember I was in my home, and I started to pick up the Bible again, and I was reading on Noah's flood, right? Because I was reading it from the beginning, and I was reading about Noah's flood, and I read a quote in Patriarchs and Prophets on after the flood. It was page 110, and something to the effect of hey, the wicked will have no safety, right? When the Lord comes again to destroy the earth, the wicked at that time, the wicked will have no safety, but the righteous will. And it was quoting Psalm 91. How none of these things will come touch you, that if you make the Lord your habitation, if you make the Lord your safety, your safe place. Let me put it in this way, in the kids' language. If you make Jesus your very best friend, that you will be saved and preserved, like Noah was on the ark. I don't know why, but when I read that, I recognize my purpose again. And again, through the circumstances of my life, what led me to that point, and everything, I realized, that even then, even though I was running away, but just like the prodigal son and the father was in there lying in wait, so was the Lord still waiting for me. And it was almost like His love never changed. All this stuff I started to realize, man, and then I just said 3 words that stuck with me. And it was just I miss Jesus. And this was a few years ago. And I, reconnected with Elder Pierre. I call him Pop. I reconnected with him, called him, and I came and seen him within a couple of days of me making this decision. I saw him right away. And I tell you, I as someone who's come from before, in a sense, the street, the gutter, a lot of addictions, things like that, the Lord helped break a lot of these things for me. But I think the biggest takeaway in my journey so far, right? And we're all going to go through some ups and downs. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing, it's not like you have, a linear life when you're with the Lord, right? But you don't have to get discouraged. That's one thing that I think the biggest thing that happens to us is we get so discouraged that we want to give up. But we can't give up because He never gave up. He doesn't give up on you. And so the biggest takeaway is that my restoration, my rebirth, my redemption is so much more personal now. And I rather would have, no matter what I'm doing, no matter what's happening in life, it's just so much better with Jesus in it. And so much better when you have an active, interactive relationship with Him, right? I mean, you can study the Bible all you want, and there are people who do that, but then they're not spiritual, right? They're not like connecting. They're just learning things. They're just being intellectually, they just want to sound spiritual. And so my challenge to everyone here is that we all go through some things. We're all going to go through some depressing moments, but I'll say this, and I've said this before, if you make the Lord your habitation, you make Jesus your very best friend, He is the first thing you think of, He is the last thing you think of, He is throughout your day, moment by moment. No matter what comes at you, yes, it's going to feel bad. There's going to be sad times, but you can never be depressed as a Christian. You can never be depressed as a Christian. And again, there's too much to look forward to. And when you think about it, like when I was reading about the flood, and I'm like, man, this earth, this world is just going to all come apart. What's the point of going through the mountains and the sceneries and the streets and going through life day in and day out and just living for today when it's all going to go away? How do you know it's going to go away? Because you know what? Today never lasts, right? You go to sleep and now today's gone. Now you have tomorrow. So my challenge to you, my challenge to all of us here is to never let go of why you are where you are. Never let go of your purpose, of why you are here, why you are called to the mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Even if you weren't a Seventh-day Adventist, you were called from birth. You know how many billions of chances it were that you would never have been born? But the Lord had called you. Never let go of that. I remember when I came to college, I had a sign on my door. Remember why you are here. And I may have forgotten that at some point. But that's my challenge to all of us and to all of you. Remember why you are here. Remember, if you make Jesus your very best friend, if you make the Lord your habitation, and you make Him your refuge, remember that, hey, when the time comes, you will be safe. And I'll tell you right now, life, I'd rather be in the tornado with Jesus than be in the Bahamas without Him. Amen? If you desire to make that decision and renew that decision and to have that life of restoration, to be with Jesus no matter what, stand with me as we sing our final hymn, hymn number 191.